Hello Biology 2, welcome to flipping, I guess this is our third lesson by now, and we are going to look at chapter 21, section 2 now. We're going to look at how fungi is classified. So, when looking at fungi, they are classified according to their structure and their method of reproduction. So when we look at this, we have four main groups of fungi, and they're the common molds, which are also known by their scientific name of the zygomycota, the sac fungi, which are the ascomycota, the club fungi, which are the basidiomycota, and the imperfect fungi, which are the deuteromycota. Now, I don't think I'll ever ask you to recall those names and spell them exactly how they are on there, but if you see that written on a piece of paper, maybe for the test, if you see zygomycota, you might be able to match it up to the fact that those are the common molds. So, we're going to look at the first two today. I believe just the common molds and the sac fungi. So, starting off the common molds, what are some characteristics of the common molds? First thing is, we would just know these as our familiar molds that grow on meat, cheese, and bread, and they are called zygomycetes, or just common molds. Again, I'm not going to have you ever have to memorize those fancy scientific names, but as you can see from the previous slide right here, these are just the molds that you see growing on your bread. These are the ones we've all seen, I'm sure, growing in your pantry at some point or another. So when looking at the zygomycetes, or the common molds again, they have a life cycle that includes a zygospore, and this zygospore is just a resting spore that contains zygotes formed during the sexual phase of the mold's life cycle. So these type of molds, they can go through their sexual reproduction, they can produce a spore, and then this spore can just sit and wait until conditions are right for it to start growing again. So there could be mold spores sitting again all over the place. There's just not enough moisture or not enough correct temperature for them to grow the way they need to grow. So when we look at the life cycle, one example they use in the book was a black bread mold. However, this applies to all other of the common molds. They produce both sexually and asexually. So this is a characteristic that you will need to know for this group. However, the book is going to go into great detail about kind of the specifics of each type, kind of how they reproduce sexually and asexually. I don't know if that's necessarily important. It could just be a lot of information that really doesn't apply to a lot. So we're just going to need to know that they can reproduce both sexually and asexually, and that these are the common molds, and that they have what is called a zygospore. So zygospore, remember that one right there. So continuing on, that is it for the common molds. We're going to move to the sac fungi. So the sac fungi, again, we're just going to ask the same question: what are some characteristics that they have? And again, their name is the ascomycota. So again, you're not going to ever have to remember that, but that's named for the ascus, which is a reproductive structure that contains spores. So I have a picture there on the right. The ascus, if you can see that black arrow, is pointing to one of those really long, thin filament type things. So that is kind of, I guess, would say an ascus that does not have any spores. And if you look at the red arrow, you can see those large spores inside of there. That is kind of an ascus that has produced spores. So that is a very key feature of this group, because it actually is the reason it has its name. So you're not going to find an ascus on any other group besides the ascomycota or the sac fungi. And then the life cycle of the sac fungi. The life cycle of an ascomycete usually includes both asexual and sexual reproduction. So again, that is one of the familiarities it shares with the first group, our common molds. So the common molds in the sac fungi will both produce asexually and sexually. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail about how that all happens, because it's really kind of a long process that, again, it's kind of counterproductive to try to memorize all of that. So the last important thing we need to remember about the sac fungi is that it includes the yeast. So yeasts are the unicellular fungi, and they reproduce by budding. And budding is pretty much just when a new organism develops from an outgrowth of the original organism. So I'll try to draw this up in class maybe a little bit better of what that actually looks like, but that's how yeast reproduce, and that's another form of asexual reproduction. So when we think about the sac fungi, we can't forget about budding, so that's going to be a big one. So don't forget about budding. And these dry granules of yeast contain ascospores, again, which we mentioned previously, which become active in a moist environment. So this makes sense because a lot of yeast are used in making beer and wine and bread, Now when we think bread, that might not be moist, but you got to think what bread looks like when it's just a dough. So it's pretty moist. So that is the sac fungi and the common molds. We are going to hit on our next two on the next video and maybe go over some important fungi that fall into each one of those groups. So let me know if you have any other questions.